In this cinematography breakdown, I'm going to be looking at the Netflix series Dark. I was immediately hooked by how many night scenes they had to shoot. Now, if you've ever tried to shoot anything at night, you'll know that there are numerous challenges. And that's just if you're working in a city or a location where you actually have some natural light, some light which is in the environment to work with. Take that out to a deep dark forest somewhere, and suddenly you have to invent the entire look of the light that you're going to be using. Now, you will have seen in films and TV series various cliches, tropes, conventions over the years to get around this. Now, one of the classic things that people will do is actually use atmospheric elements like fog, mist, smoke, whatever it is, and light that up so that you can actually create a base level of illumination within a shot which feels like it's giving everything a bit of space, bit of depth, and not just falling off to darkness. The downside of that is that it can lend it a certain vibe, and that doesn't always work, whether it's for a narrative reason, a stylistic reason. Perhaps you want everything to feel a little bit more grounded and realistic. So how do you get around that? Of course, there's always the idea that you can use moonlight as your motivation, but if anyone's ever tried to shoot with moonlight, you'll know that it's actually very difficult to make that feel convincing without bigger budgets, without bigger crews, without bigger equipment in order to cover the kind of area that you need. Now, I should caveat all of that by saying when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the more expansive setup. So wide shots where you are dealing with head to toe at least on one subject and perhaps a whole group in shot, showing a deep background where you're going to have to deal with quite a lot of space and actually light that space in order to make it feel good. Now, I have had to, on various shoots, do things along these lines, dealing with shooting deep background, dealing with shooting in locations where there isn't any natural light, and it is incredibly challenging to get everything that you need working. And on those shoots, I wasn't dealing with anything where I needed dialogue and I needed to have lots of talent interacting with each other as well. So I'm just going to flick through a couple of frames here. We're not going to look at the whole series, I just want to focus on some specific elements. Now, the cinematography throughout the series is gorgeous, and there are lots of really sumptuous scenes which are filmed in daytime, filmed in people's houses, in other locations throughout the world. But for this particular breakdown, I'm just looking at the nighttime scenes, mostly in the woods. So starting off with this frame just here, we've got, I don't know, like 6 subjects in there. They are carrying torches, and that is obviously, sorry, I should have said that. That is obviously another convention that you will have, the use of torches to provide some practical source of light within a scene, as well as being a point of interest and something which can be dynamically used to either reveal things or help to draw focus to where your subjects are. Because if this scene just here was basically framed up the way that it is, but without those torches in there, it would be much harder to, as a viewer, focus in on the people and where they were. But the torches immediately are the brightest spots there. They draw your eye in, and we can already see there's a bit of atmosphere here. It's not going full-blown mist or smoke, but there's something that is there, and it's definitely helping you to see the beams of light and the torches. Skimming through, we've got another scene without any torches this time, and they're side lit. You can see trees receding to the background. Same scene, someone strikes a torch. It catches the atmosphere that's there and helps to bloom everything out. And then we have this chase scene where we're moving through the space. Obviously this is a little bit blurry. Torch as a focus point helps you to find your subject, and there we've got the canopy of the trees. That needs to be illuminated as well. We need to actually have something to know that there is something behind him, otherwise he is just in the void. Finally, we're going to be looking at this scene where we're moving in space, and we do have some practical illumination that you can actually see in shot in those street lights, and that's catching all of the rain, and those go on quite a way. You know, they have got a deep background there. Everything draws you to our subjects in the center. This is actually on a crane, so everything's jibbing down, and we have them coming right up to the front of the shot, being the foreground elements where they were the background. You see it all play out in real time. they have their moment there, and then the crane moves back up and they move off. So it's a very interesting, very fun shot, and quite a hard shot to execute, you know, getting that many elements working together, getting the rain working, all of your talent they've got to do a long scene, they've all got to remember the lines, they've all got to hit their marks, give or take. They have torches, which they have to be aware of. Whenever you have talent in the set using some kind of practical illumination, they have to know where they're pointing it, they have to know what they're doing with it, and here they've been very careful to show the torches moving around lots as they move towards the camera, and when they get to the camera, the torches are coming down and they're not flaring out the lens, they're not distracting from the drama that's unfolding. So let's skip back to that first frame. So we're going to look at this one just here. To start with, I would say that if you are looking to do something like this, lighting at night, getting a good crew behind you and setting up whilst it's still daytime is really going to help you. Having people moving around at night, having people trying to work and set up stands, set up lights, maybe rig generators and power is immensely more difficult if you're having to do it at night. To start with then, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and look at what we've got. I would say we have a relatively big high source up here, and that is playing across this whole area. It's helping to pick out our subjects, so we have light catching on them just there. That's making their silhouettes more obvious, they're passing through the frame. But we also do have all of this atmosphere that's being caught both by their torches and actually by the beam of light which is coming from the right hand side of frame just there. Now they are at an advantage here because everything is down in a small divot, in a small valley. So when we're trying to place that light high up, we're already winning because we're already high up to start with and we don't have to perhaps worry so much. Something to be aware of when you're setting a frame that large is the fall off of light across the frame. As soon as you start to light anything that is this wide, you're going to need to get your light sources very far away so that the fall off of light isn't really obvious within the shot. Now that means that you're going to need more power, and that can really turn into a vicious cycle because you want to make it look naturalistic, you want to get the light very high up, you want to get the light very far away, but you want to cover a large area. So you inevitably find you actually need a lot more light than you would imagine to do something like this. Even with cameras that have a relatively high sensitivity, you're still in that realm of having to use potentially HMIs, or now we're moving towards the point where we can use something like an aperture 600D or an array of aperture 600Ds, which gives us the ability to obviously have a lot of firepower without much current draw, which means we can run it off a small generator. Helps immensely if you're running dialogue, not to have to run a really big generator very close to where you're filming, or even potentially off battery power, provided that you have enough batteries to go for the length of time that you would need. Now, as well as lighting up the background just there, our key light is actually playing on the foreground along here, picking out the front of that side of the slope, and then everything on the other side is falling off to darkness. I'm going to say dark a lot in this episode. We do have a few pops along the side of trees and objects here. Everything's just being picked out a little bit, and that is another reason why you need to cover such a large area, because if you're not picking out all of those details, you end up with just a swamp around your nicely illuminated area of blackness that goes off to really deep, dark black, which isn't what you really want when you're trying to build a world and create a sense of where these characters are existing. A bonus of the torches obviously is that as well as those beams of light that they create, they will be kicking light towards anything they're pointing at. So if you can prime up your talent to sweep them around in a sensible fashion, illuminate what you want, it gives you the ability to control a little bit of a scene where perhaps you wouldn't be able to get light and perhaps you need to see something. So being able to pick those things out really helps. Jumping forwards, we are looking at this frame, and in this frame we have a very hard light source coming in from the left hand side just there, and that is giving us enough to see our different characters, sensible moves on production design, having characters in different coloured outfits, characters with different length hair, different hairstyles. It all helps to differentiate who's who very quickly when you're trying to, in a shot, show lots of people and eventually show lots of people moving around and being dramatic. Breaking it down, we have everyone lit from this side, and you can obviously see they're all picked out on the same side. Feels like a single source, and I wouldn't actually say that source is particularly high up given the way the light's falling on their faces. It doesn't feel like it's really coming down at an angle and pointing towards this area just here. I would say it more feels like the whole thing is coming a little bit more sidey like that across the scene. And that means it's got a slightly different feel, but it works quite well, so nothing to complain about. In addition to catching our subjects, we are also getting those hits across the background, picking out all of those tree trunks and just reiterating the fact that we are in the woods here. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be the same light source. Say we're lighting this with a Fresnel, say we've got a 6K and we've got it 40 feet away from our subjects just here, and that's what's illuminating them. Maybe that gives us enough to light the trees, but maybe actually we want to create some layering and we don't want to have the light spilling across everything that is behind our subjects. So we have the 6K zoned in on them, and then we have another light which is specifically dealing with the tree line behind them. It's a good way of being able to segment your shots, get more control, and also finesse what is going on to your talent versus what is going on to the background, so treating them separately. Where you're dealing with a shot like this that's side lit, you've got the opportunity to do that, and it won't be too detrimental to anything that you're doing. Now it's worth pointing out, if you haven't noticed already, that the downsides of their faces are completely down. There is nothing there. It is black on that side where the light is not catching for each of them. In the next shot, we're going to see that actually when you get the torches in there, changes the whole vibe of the scene completely. Looking at this shot, we have 3 of the talent now with torches illuminated, and that is kicking directly towards the camera. We have a lot of haze coming in, and that haze really helps to bleed everything out and give everything a bit of a glow. Separates out our subject in the foreground just there. She's still getting light from the left hand side as we discussed before, but now that haze helps to pick out her silhouette a little bit more, and we have all of this down her, well, right hand side of frame, her left hand side, and that gives her silhouette a little bit more definition. In addition to this, we have far more going on along the side of the slope just here. Everything's starting to show a bit more detail, and actually I would say that it does seem like they've added more light in the background as well. I can certainly see a little bit more detail in the tree line back here. Now I could argue that maybe that's the haze of the torches just bringing up the level, but I don't think it would work like that. I think that actually between the two shots this does have a little bit more light in there than the previous shot did. So now they've got the torches in there, they've been able to raise up some of the ambient level. Across the right hand side we're also getting more play onto the slope as well. So how do you go about lighting this? Well, staging is an enormously important element of this. They have a good clear space around where their talent are. There's nothing that's going to interrupt the light that's falling on them. And then they're trying to position people in an interesting fashion. We've already spoken about how it goes down into that little valley, that dip, which helps to zone everything in, gives you some areas that you can illuminate within the slope, and really helps to create an interesting shot. And then the trees in the background give you that background interest and helps to sell the depth and sell the idea that there is light coming from somewhere. Now for me, it really doesn't ever feel particularly like moonlight in these shots, and indeed in a lot of the shots where we're looking at this, we're actually going to rain almost immediately afterwards. So in that scenario, it is very unlikely that it would be a lovely moonlit night. It definitely starts to feel like this is just a stylized way of showing the woods at night rather than trying to be a simulation of moonlight or a simulation of some kind of street light that's in there. This is definitely them getting around the fact that everything would just be pitch black. They have the torches, that's their concession to practical sources here, but apart from that, everything else is just going with the idea that people are familiar enough with the Hollywood version of nighttime that they will be accepting of this and not really question it. And it works, and it's fine, and you can do the same thing. Jumping forward to the scene where they're running through the forest, that presents its own unique challenges. As soon as your talent are moving through a scene and eating up the landscape as they do it, you've got to work very hard to make it, one, coherent, all the usual conventions of how you would treat a chase scene, and either make it intelligible for your audience or use it to discombobulate your audience if that's your goal, will apply to this. But in addition, you as a cinematographer have to deal with the fact that as they move through those woods, they are going to get either closer or further away from your light source. And here you can see that they are still being side lit somewhat, so all the light's coming in from this direction just here, and that means that as they travel through the scene, they're getting closer to the light source, and you've got to get your light source further away. You've got to make sure that perhaps the shot isn't so long that you start to get into that fall-off zone where you're going to see the light level go up as they move forwards, which would really start to destroy the whole vibe of it. We can see far enough into the background here, and I would suggest that this is two light sources. So you can see everything along this side is illuminated, and some things in the background just there are visible. But then we definitely have areas of darkness down here and deep pockets of darkness back here. So it feels like they've got maybe two Fresnel sources for the background, and perhaps a third for the subjects, although I feel like the Fresnel which is closer to us, that's dealing with all of these trees, is also doing everything which is on them as well. And it doesn't take much. You can see that these are trees without really having to be told, but they are just being hit by light from one side, and that's it. We can see enough of our yellow on Jonas to know that that is him. We can see enough of the red and a little bit of the marks on the hoods on Mikhail to know that that's him. And those two choices in costume and styling have really helped during this scene then to keep you just aware enough of who's who and who's where. And then finally jumping back onto this scene where we've got the rain. Rain is a constant within dark. We see it an awful lot. It's a very challenging thing to do, to shoot with water on set like that. We have on a very small number of occasions done it, and I'd love to do something that had the scope of this, but there are so many things that become harder to do when you have an area this size that needs to be, on the one hand, wet down, but on the other hand, actually to have active falling rain. So just to draw attention very clearly to these sources that are kicking down and acting as everything that we need in the scene to show us where we are, the fact that we've moved out of the woods and now we're on some kind of urban street, and that then also reflects in all of the puddles, on the wet leaves, on the wet tarmac, and we still have those little pops of light from their torches and a little bit of light from the torch beam playing on the ground. That, same as before, is helping to draw attention to the center of frame just here. We see them exit the woods, we see them come towards us. The leading lines of those street lights are helping us to know where to look. It's a very pleasing frame, very well executed, and it then jibs down so we can see the drama that unfolds. I think I would also point out here that when you're dealing with street lights, you don't necessarily get what you want out of them in terms of level, in terms of color rendition. So you might find that you have something which is an LED source that looks really bad on skin, doesn't give you the saturation in certain colors that you need. Sometimes you'll be dealing with an old sodium vapor source, sometimes it's neither of those things and you just kind of got to roll with it. Sometimes within one street there will be mixed sources, so you'll see changes in color temperature as you go down the street. If you are in a position to, putting in your own lights will really help. Whenever you do something like that, it starts to get more challenging with permits, it starts to get more challenging with the amount of time you have to prepare, so it's a diminishing returns thing. And for wide shots like this, unless you're going to play it like they're playing it here, where you actually see everything happen, and we come down to effectively a medium wide on them, where you see the whole group working together, and you've got to be able to discern who's who and see the whole scene play out. If you're doing that, then it's worth dressing everything and making it look fantastic. But if it's just a wide and then you're going to cut into coverage, then you can bring in other light fixtures. You can flag off these street lights from your subjects, and you can actually light it how you want. So depending on what you're going for stylistically and how you're actually going to execute that shot, and it's a very rare occasion that either in a series or in an ad, say we're shooting a commercial for someone, it's rare that we will get to play out something exclusively in a wide. Even if you want to, time pressures and edits, if you don't have a real handle on how the creative is going to go, you will find that that shot gets cut and coverage gets dumped in instead if you've shot the coverage. If you haven't shot the coverage, then you kind of got them over a barrel and they have to go with it. So yeah, apart from that, a lot of darkness in this shot. We have enough happening on the fences there to give us more of a leading line, and you can see that that's very clearly marked out with where the streetlights are as well. They are our entire motivation for this scene. Moving forwards to the next frame, we see that reveal of the medium. We have not a flattering light on them, but it works really well. On the side of frame just here, just going to make that a little bit thinner, on the side of frame just here, we have everything picking out a silhouette. They've landed on their mark, they've nailed it. Their torches are pointing away from the action or down so that they're not being distracting. Still picking out bits of rain, but they're not flaring out the lens, which is important. We have enough going on this side of our character just here. There's a little bit catching from the streetlight behind just here. Everyone has enough going on and enough in their faces that we can tell who they are, and we can sense some of the emotion that is happening within that scene. Works really well. We still have the practicals in the background, and the rain is absolutely awesome because that's all illuminated, creating a bigger pool of light, a bigger area that helps to sell what we're seeing. Perhaps my favorite part of any scene like this where you do have rain is all of the reflections that you're going to get in the tarmac, and that just brings the whole thing to life. If you imagine in a shot of a street where you would normally have the streetlights just beaming down, but you wouldn't see all of that reflection around the subject just there, you wouldn't get the silhouette of their outfit against the street. So having that wet street really helps to sell the whole thing and layers up the shot very nicely. For the purposes of the breakdown, that's all we're going to look through. However, I would say that if you're interested in this kind of thing, just start to make even if it's a mental note, but even better, actually write down some scenes from films where you see characters in certain nighttime environments, whether it's on a city street, if it's in a car, if it's outside of a house, on a doorstep, in the woods, in the middle of a desert, at sea. All of those different examples of night scenes can start to build up a bit of a mood board for you as to how you're going to treat in your own work a night scene. It can be highly stylized, it can be very naturalistic. With cameras that are available now, you can utilize very high ISO settings, and you can go with a very fast lens and shoot with a relatively small amount of light. But that only gets you so far, and it indeed starts to bring in its own challenges. So if you are taking that low light sensor and putting it into a city environment, suddenly everything's going to be super bright, which actually gets really, really difficult. You need to be bringing in some of your own light in order to key your talent, so you don't just end up with completely bleached out, overblown highlights in every single car that you see, in every single shop window that you see. So even where you have the ability to use high ISOs, they don't necessarily completely solve the challenges. You still need to be able to control the areas that you're working in and balance your ratios. And that's really the most critical thing with this. What are your ratios going to be? So with any scene like this, you have to start out with an appreciation of the level of equipment you're going to have access to, what you're going to need to get a really strong look, and how those shots are going to play out. Can you get away with a minimal number of wide shots? If you can, then you only need that really powerful light for perhaps one night, and then you can cover off your close-up shots with a much smaller fixture and not have to worry about a big generator, lots of power, a cherry picker in order to place the light, or a really big stand like a Stratocrank or Long John Silver. All of those things bring a level of complexity which can be too much to handle with a small crew, especially when you're trying to get through a lot of pages or trying to execute something with a very definite movement and the talent have to hit it. There are a few other scenes which I'm perhaps going to look at for Dark. Some of them involve torches again. There's a very cool round globe torch which just looks like a production design wet dream. It's the idea of we've got to show our talent in a very confined space and they've got to light the way and they've got to look good. How do we do that? Well, what if they carried their own softbox? It's a perfect way of getting around this challenge, and within the narrative it actually works really well. And if you are interested how this can be applied in practical terms with a small crew, I've got some 60-second breakdowns of how we have approached various night shoots and the challenges that we found with those as well.